And joining us to talk about this, about the curriculum, about Mātauranga Māori, because she recently did a webinar, hosted a webinar on that issue and its place, and generally the state of education leading up into this election. She's still only 6 weeks away. Is somebody I widely respect as probably one of the best evidence-based educators and education thought analysts in this country, Dr. Nina Hood from the Education Hub, and she joins us now. Nina, lovely to have you on the show again. Welcome.
Thank you. Great to be back.
You know why you're here, and you've received a fair bit of media attention, including from the New Zealand Herald and Radio New Zealand the last 24 hours, as a result of in particular, a survey that you held amongst, as I understand it, teachers relating to the curriculum and its applicability throughout New Zealand. Can you take us through that survey first, please?
Sure. So what we wanted to find out with the survey was how teachers in different schools across the country are interpreting the curriculum in their own school context. So how they're designing the curriculum, how they're selecting the content that they're going to teach, and how they're selecting the resources or instructional materials that they're going to use to actually teach that content. And the reason for doing it is that we know anecdotally that there is a huge amount of variability in terms of how different schools, and often actually just different teachers within the same school, are approaching the curriculum, which means that children are getting widely different experiences at school. But we never had any data to really back that up. So this survey was an attempt to try and get that data to understand, well, what's going on across the country in terms of the curriculum and what students are actually learning at school.
Yes, the worrying part to me, and you pointed it out as well, is that almost 30% of teachers didn't think that their school considered curriculum design important. And you say that given that curriculum is such a fundamental aspect of schooling, that over a quarter of teachers would say it's not considered important by the school really does concern me, i.e. you. I find it extraordinary that you would get that return.
It's terrifying, and I think it speaks to a number of the issues that we see in our education system at the moment. To be honest, it doesn't surprise me that much. I mean, it horrifies me, but it doesn't surprise me. And I think over the last decade or so, probably a little bit longer, we've seen a de-emphasis on the curriculum in New Zealand schools, and that's in part the result of the current curriculum that we have at the moment, which is content-free, broadly speaking, so it doesn't actually specify the content that's to be taught. And so I think sort of really thinking carefully about the curriculum, the role it plays within education, how we want to be structuring and sequencing the knowledge that students are encountering over their time at school hasn't been prioritised across our school system. But it is really deeply concerning because the curriculum is the what. It is what is being taught in our schools. And you're right, over a quarter of teachers didn't think that it was considered important at their school.
Now, the thing, I'm trying to take the politics out of this. I mean, it's difficult, but I'll do my very best. But although we can look back over the last 6 years and say, oh gosh, things have got worse, they weren't brilliant before that either. We had 3 successive national ministers of education from 2008 to 2017, and Toli Hikaya-Parata and Nikki Kaye. The rot started there really, didn't it?
It did. So if you look at the data that we've got, particularly from some of the big international studies showing achievements of students in maths, reading and science, we've seen a decline over the last 2 decades, but it particularly intensified about 10 years ago. We saw a much steeper decline over the last 10 years. So it's been around for a while. It's not a new issue. But I think there are a few things that have happened over the last few years, including COVID, that have made the situation worse.
Yeah, okay. So now, the other thing is I noticed you would have probably, and I'm sure you would have caught up with a Radio New Zealand story about the this report and the state of education at the moment. And one of the university academics, I think it was from Waikato, it might have been else, so you'll be able to tell me, said, oh, well, our PISA ratings aren't all that bad, really. This is our international rankings against other countries. That there was a big decline, I think he said about 10, 12 years ago, and we've just maintained that level. Is that your understanding?
It's not quite how I'd see the situation. So I think, yes, there was absolutely in the 3 years, because PISA happens every 3 years, so there was a big decline between 2012 and 2015. But my reading of the data is that decline it's levelled out a bit. Sorry, no, the big decline happened between about 2009 and 2015. And it has lessened, but there's still been a downwards trajectory over the past few years as well. So we're definitely not quite levelling out, and we are not increasing.
I'd like to think I'm a relatively intelligent person. If we were starting to notice those declines, and they were significant declines in 2009, the PISA test, I think, is what, 15-year-olds, is that right? Or 12-year-olds?
It is.
15-year-olds.
15-year-olds.
Right. And it measures reading, basic maths, and does it do writing as well? It does science, I know that.
No, it does science. Yeah. No, not writing.
So it's just reading, and English skills.
Science.
Yeah, right. So those are the three keys. I'm assuming that if I get to, so my average 15-year-old's probably in about year 10 or 11. So I'm assuming that something went wrong before those PISA tests started measuring the outcome. So you don't get to those results in 2009, 2010 without something have happened well prior to that made sure that those test results were so poor, right?
Correct. And if we look at the data that we have in New Zealand, the National Monitoring Study gives us a pretty good understanding that tests students nationwide at year 4 and year 8. And what we see is that there is a big decline in achievement between year 4 and year 8. So probably what we're really noticing is in the second half of primary school, we are seeing that drop intensify, and that then obviously, as you say, continues on into our secondary schools as well.
Right, so we can't blame the secondary schools for it because it's an actual fact happening in the years before they go to year 9 at secondary school.
Well, I mean, I'm not sure that talking about blame is necessarily the most useful thing, and I don't think it completely lets secondary schools off lets them off. But I think what we've got to say is that this is an issue that's affecting children the whole way through their schooling. And we need to be addressing every aspect of schooling at every year level to address it. So it's not just about making a change in one year level or in one part of the schooling sector. It's got to be across the board.
So the curriculum issue, which we now all look and go, horror, 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 and both National and Labour, both Jan Tinetti, Chris Hipkins just a month ago, obviously Erica Stanford's made a big deal of it as the National Party spokesman education, are both identifying the curriculum as a problem and are promoting even legislation to deal with some form of uniformity in the curriculum space. But I guess the question that they've recognised that. But I guess the question I've got, and so will you have, Nina, is, yeah, okay, now you're teaching the curriculum, so at least there's some uniformity potentially going forward. And there are maybe some concentration upon, if you like, rote or building block basics. But how long before you start to get, in your estimation, even were those policies enacted next year, some degree of upward progress from those policies would we see as measurable in the future?
Mm-hmm. It's a great question. And I mean, you could go back a step further and say, well, are they actually putting the right changes in place to lead to the improvements that we want to see? And I think there are some big question marks over that. But if we take that issue off the table and we say, okay, so what they're putting in place we think is the best solution for trying to improve educational achievement amongst our school-age students, how long are we looking at? It's not a quick fix. So, and it's going to take time. And the reason it's going to take time is, one, there's a whole lot of upskilling that's going to need to go on to be supporting teachers to be able to teach the new curriculum and to be embedding the new pedagogical approaches that are being promoted. So there's a piece on the upskilling. There's also a piece around the resourcing that they're going to need. So it's unrealistic to say, well, we've created this new curriculum, go to it and teach it. Teachers actually require resources and materials to help them to do that effectively. And that's an area where in New Zealand we have historically really fallen down. We haven't been particularly good at thinking through what it takes to actually effectively implement at scale a new education initiative. And then you've got the question of, it's one thing for 5-year-olds who are starting the schooling system. You're going to probably, hopefully, all things being equal, see them achieving at the rates that we would really hope for them to do so. But for your students who are already in the schooling system, it's going to take time, because we know from the data that very few students within the New Zealand education system are actually achieving at the curriculum level that they're currently at. So there's a huge amount of improvement that we're going to need to see in them before they actually get to that stage.
That's frightening, that's frightening to me too, because it's such a long gestation period before you start to see any uplift. And a lot of kids who are currently in the education system now will have left school before those changes come through. Does it worry you in particular with boys? I'm thinking, I'm just choosing gender. No, I will choose the gender. That the damage done to them through their fractured learning through COVID is going to last with them for an entire lifetime?
Yeah, so I think we're seeing the impact of COVID affect all students. I don't think you can just say
no, that's fair enough.
One gender. So yeah. We're seeing that across the board. So absolutely, and that is going to have a flow-on impact. And it's not going to be, it is going to continue with them for a number of years. And we're seeing that both in terms of their academic achievement, but also in terms of their well-being. And we know that well-being plays a role in how well you achieve academically. So there are a whole host of different things going on. And yes, I think you're absolutely right that we're going to see that for a while. If we come back to just boys' achievement, it is an area of concern because we have seen a decline, in particular decline in the achievement of boys across most curriculum areas over the last decade, and they are now achieving at significantly lower levels than girls in most curriculum areas.